The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. This one is hosted by Project Realms and XBOSoft, and today we're going to talk about exploratory mobile testing. We have a great speaker, JeanAnn Harrison, and myself, Jan Prinsen. That's the old guy on the photo on the right. JeanAnn, welcome. Great to have you here.
Welcome. Oh, welcome to you. Thank you so much for having me.
JeanAnn, could you tell us a little bit about how you got involved in mobile testing?
Sure. Years ago, I got involved with a project with the Los Angeles Police Department. And so if anyone is receiving tickets from police officers, you can blame me.
Sure, we all are.
Mobile devices. They're mobile devices that produce those traffic tickets. I worked on that project as well as, and it does work well, I will say. And then I also worked on heart monitors that go ahead and diagnose heart problems for patients that doctors don't even know. So I've been doing that for many years, and now I've transitioned into testing mobile phones and tablets and doing a lot of comparisons with laptop versions of applications. So it's been a rather interesting journey of mobile testing.
Okay, great. I'm sure most of us like the healthcare work better than the parking ticket work.
I'm sure.
And in your free time, you're an ice skater, right?
Yes, I am an adult figure skater and a pioneer in adult figure skating competitions. I started I skated in the very first adult nationals here in the United States in 1995, and I will be competing again in April of 2014, so I'm very excited about that.
Okay, looking forward to it in the webinar. My name is Jan Prinsen. I'm from XBOSoft. XBOSoft was founded in 2006. We are dedicated to software quality and provide QA consulting and testing services. We have offices in the US and Europe, where I'm from. JeanAnn, do you want to say a little bit about the company you work for?
Sure. Project Realms is based out of Minnesota, USA, and it is a company that does primarily consulting for entire software projects. So you can check us online. The link will be available later, but there's some really wonderful projects that we do encompassing all kinds of different types of domains.
Okay, great. Short little bit on housekeeping before I'll give the word to JeanAnn to continue. Everyone except the speakers will be muted during the webinar. You can ask questions and are encouraged to ask questions using the GoToWebinar control panel on the right side of your screen. I will try to fit them in when appropriate, but if not, we have a separate Q&A session at the end of the webinar. JeanAnn prepared quite some slides, so we have to move forward, so we'll try to fit it in at the end otherwise. And important, you will get an info on the recording after the webinar. JeanAnn, I'm going to give you the control of the slides.
Okay.
And let's get started.
Okay. And we're showing my screen. I'm going to,
yes,
there we go. Okay. Okay. So we are going to talk about today when to automate and when not to automate for your mobile testing, as well as some exploratory testing techniques for mobile and embedded devices. What I did want to mention is, okay, we're not going to work, I think I lost, oh, there we go, okay. Okay, so this is the agenda, which is a very packed hour. I'm going to talk fast. I am going to ask that people take notes because I am not reading every single slide. There's a lot of information, and I just ask you to take your notes. The presentation will be available online. If not, you can always email me, and I'll be happy to send it to you. So don't get caught up in, oh, I have to read every slide now. No, you don't. just listen to what I have to say, because I have a lot of different types of things that not necessarily written on the slide. Okay, and I'll go ahead and, I did want to mention too, not covered today is user experience. Dr. Philip Liu, who is the CEO of XBOSoft, he did an amazing presentation at STPCon, and I would highly recommend that you contact, maybe Jan could provide a link to his presentation, because it really was very helpful for mobile devices. I will not be covering usability, trainability, web application, or security tests for mobile. It's a little bit out of scope. As you can see, this is a packed hour. I will also not be covering tools. I will not be recommending tools. This is not the appropriate webinar for that. So please bear with me in terms of questions. Jan will be providing a link on tools, and I'm sure you'll find that very helpful. So moving forward, okay, what I did want to talk about is what types of devices that exist. So many times I get people asking me and telling me, oh, you know, I'm doing this testing on this type of device, and they don't really know what type of device they're talking about. So I want to make the distinction that there's mobile phones, there's tablets, and on top of that there are proprietary devices like heart monitors, the LAPD's ticket generator, the GPS devices, PDAs. All these kinds of things are devices that we need to test beyond just mobile phones. So when you're talking mobile testing, please be careful with your terminology. Be specific. An example of embedded software would be something like, automobile computer systems, air traffic control systems, elevators. I mean, you know, when you go into an elevator, I've seen elevators with this complex computer system. On, wow, what in the world would be in there? But you can imagine the type of testing that's involved. So be aware that there's more than just mobile phone and tablets. Okay, types of mobile apps. Now, this is also a discussion about the native apps and the hybrid apps and how you can go about testing them. There's some overlap with web application testing, but you're not going to get too much of that here. Some of the techniques, you know, apply to all of testing, whether it's mobile or not. But I'm going to focus today on native applications and hybrid applications. And as you can see, native is local to the device. Hybrid has more messages going back and forth, not just one way. It's a back and forth type of communication, and that's a hybrid application. You might have heard about this, you know, in passing. And then there's web applications, which are mobile websites and do not at all sit on the device itself, so it stays in space. Now, one of the things that I wanted to share with my kitty cat friend here, who's the thinking cat, we have defining specific skills for the mobile embedded tester. And what I want you to understand is that mobile testing, and basically really software testing, is you need to have more than just, so many times I get people say, oh, I have an electrical engineer degree, so I'm perfect for this. You need more of a wider space, a wider perspective. And so what we recommend, and I've certainly talked with people about this, is knowledge of the hard sciences is wonderful. We need it for our logical thought process, as well as we also have to have the creative side. So mixing the two is something that makes a really good tester. And so, you know, you want to have also an experience of different domains. The more domains you can be involved with in any level, on any type of situation, you can learn from it. So you want to absorb it and then go ahead and say, how can I apply this to my thought process? How can I apply it to my creative side? And one of the things that I wanted to point out is that John Hagar has written a book. It's not available yet, but it will be soon. It's called Software Test Attacks to Break Mobile and Embedded Devices. and this is a book I personally reviewed. Highly recommend it. It's well organized, and he and I will be doing a full day's tutorial together at CAST, and that's, if you look online, it's CAST 2013. You'll find information there, or again, send me a tweet or an email. Okay, but that book, by the way, is a very, very good book for referencing and for help on a lot of things, including setting up a test lab, etc. Okay, mobile testing definitions. This is another issue I wanted to talk about very, very quickly. Again, I'm not going to read all of this. Be very careful with your terminology. Mobile testing does not refer to only mobile apps testing, which a lot of people use as terminology. Please say the correct terminology. Please refer to it. I see it all the time online. It's so important to make the distinctions. If you're doing just mobile phone testing or tablet testing, say that that's what you're doing. Don't say mobile testing, because as you can see, it covers a lot of different devices. Okay, to automate. Now here's the first concept. Planning. What do you want to test? I get all the time, I get the question, and I've said this to Jan many times, what tool do I use? What's the best tool? What's the best tool? You can't think about tools. You have to understand first, what is it you want to test? What do you want to see as results? What are your expectations? So you need to think about the types of tests you want to perform instead of just thinking about, oh, I just want a tool. A tool is not going to cover all those tests. So as you can see, there's a lot of different types of tests we want to think about. And to plan it out, sit down and really plan it out is very important. Define your tests. So for example, performance testing. It's not the same as it is for web testing. Performance testing might be something like, checking to see how the software behaves while you're charging the device. That is not something you would do on a web application. So performance testing is a little different, and what you want to do is think about how this can apply to performance testing, and your tests are going to reflect that. So anyway, I wanted to also think about, or in terms of planning, is you have to plan these kinds of tests and make sure that they're written down. I know that, everybody isn't agile right now. They want to keep going, move, move, move. But the problem is that if you don't plan out your tests, how are you going to know what you want to automate? Very important question. How do you know? This right here is a mind map. This mind map is a good way, and I realize that it's very difficult to read. This is not it's not the point, again, for you to sit here and try to read it on the slide. You do need, I would recommend you go to the website, which is down below on the, and I also have reference in the back of this, these slides, of the ministryoftesting.com. And Karen Johnson and James Bach have created this mind map to get started with mobile testing. This is just to get started. And this is a planning thing. Can you see what's involved here? The different colors represent hardware factors or conditions. Network communication is another one. Functional testing is another one. There are many levels to mobile testing that people need to start to consider and plan it out. And there are little things here that are very different from standard testing. I said that word again, standard testing. Testing, please don't use that word, right? Instead, I want to say testing with regards to desktop applications. So that's what you want to consider, is that there are a lot of different factors, okay?
Do you often see, JeanAnn, that people underestimate mobile testing?
Yes, they absolutely. It's a very common problem. People just think that, oh, well, the desktop is much bigger, so therefore you end up seeing, say for example, a month to get through a software project. But oh, by the way, there's the mobile part, and you can do that in a week. And usually that should be the other way around, or maybe half and half. But it's definitely not something that you can do in a couple of days. The planning alone is enough to make your head explode, I think. You know, so as long as you sit down and you plan it out, it becomes so much easier and faster. It's amazing how much faster you can go if you have that plan. And I don't mean every little step being written down. What I mean is, think about the test, what kinds of tests you want to do, and then maybe put in, and here's a little thing about exploratory, put your little reminders in. Okay, I want to do exploratory testing on network communication, and that means sending a message and making sure that message comes back. There's a message that comes back from it. So that's a test right there. Boom, done. You don't have to write all the steps to it. You don't need to. Even in a regulated environment, you don't need to. So you want to make sure that you start thinking about all these things when you're planning, okay? And Karen, by the way, if you ever get to see Karen Johnson speak, James, of course, is very well known throughout the world, but Karen does a lot of mobile testing, great speaker, has a lot of wonderful information about mobile phone and tablet testing. So check her out. I also included her website at the end of the slide presentation. Okay, now usability testing and configuration test comparisons. This is something that, again, in terms of, and I'm giving you concepts, by the way, to think about when you're considering automation, because usability testing is a very difficult thing to automate. Is it possible? To some extent. Again, you've got to think about what kinds of tests specifically you need to do that you can automate. All right? And then you've got configuration tests, and that might be an interesting thing to automate. And by configuration, what I'm saying is you're comparing a tablet and you're comparing a mobile phone, and you can compare it with the laptop version. So now you got 3 different versions that you want to compare just to see how the software behaves. Does it make sense? Is it easy to use? Is it trainable? But you're looking, when you automate, you have to look for specific objects because it doesn't know what it's looking for. So you have to look for very specific objects on the screen and say, okay, is it there? Yes. Is the icon for the news feed of Facebook available on the phone application? Yes. Is it available in the same place on the tablet version? Well, no, it isn't, but it's there, so it's easy to find. And then the same for the laptop. And so those kinds of things you can do and compare, and you can go ahead and put those in your automation tests. But again, it's very specific. And I'm going to talk about speed, and I'm going to talk about maintainability and repeatability later on. But I wanted you to think about the idea of configuration test comparisons. Okay, and then we'll go on to test coverage. Now, how much can you cover? How much can you cover in an automation test? You really can't cover everything. Your script can do some recognizable objects, but not everything. And you may need more than one script to cover what you want to cover. Is it really worth all these scripts? And that's something you need to ask yourself based on the context. What is it you're testing? Again, planning is key, and I cannot stress that enough. I hear it all the time with people that they don't take the time to plan it out. They just want to run with it. They want to code. They want to write scripts. Well, automation is not all about scripting. Automation is about thinking about what you want to automate and how to make it as efficient as possible so you can go on to what I consider the fun stuff, which is the exploratory testing. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the speed. How fast can you write a script and then how fast can you plan out the test, write the script out, and then test it? Is it faster to do that, or is it faster just to actually sit there and manually do the test? And a lot of times it's just simply faster to do the test. But again, because people are excited to do the scripting and the programming, they jump right into the tool idea and say, oh, I'm going to script, I'm going to script. In some instances, it's really good to write those scripts. And it helps a lot to get rid of the, you know, the doldrum type activities that you have to do over and over again to get through the test. Or, you know, so you're not sitting there and you're pushing buttons all day. Okay, fine. So yes, automate, please do. You know, because again, you want to, the point is you want to free up the time to do other more interesting things and to find more interesting bugs. So go ahead and do the script, but be smart about thinking about the speed.
JeanAnn, do you have an example
yes.
of one of your own projects where you think like automation was not worked well?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So when I was doing the heart monitor, and we were talking about testing the, let's go back to the screen here. We were talking, when we were trying to test the speed of the CPU, for example. Mm-hmm. Well, you know, sure, I can go ahead and I can apply a script to it to see whether or not it's the speed is jumping. But, or I could just watch it while I do certain things, but I wasn't getting the timing of when it jumped from one speed to another when I was performing a series of tests. And by that was, you know, going through kind of an end-to-end. It was end concept to end concept type of behavior. And I needed to see where the CPU speed was changing in order to specifically find a bug that I had found previously. So I went ahead and I automated it because I wanted to watch it over a period of time. Mm-hmm. And so that was important for me to go ahead and create an automation script to be able to see how it would work. And that was something that, again, you need to consider what is it you want to do, what is your expectation of the automation script itself. What do you expect to get out of it? And sometimes it's just simply easier and faster to do it manually. And a lot of times I did it manually. But there were times where automation was important. Mm-hmm. Okay? So maintainability, and this is something that a lot of testers do not think about because they're so into the automation part, that they don't always consider how maintainable the scripts are. In mobile, one of the things I've noticed is because your builds change fairly dramatically, going ahead and automating every little thing is really not efficient. It takes too much time to maintain. You end up spending the time, more time you spend on writing scripts and changing scripts than you do on actual testing. So be very careful, again, about the types of things you want to automate. It's really important to consider, again, or plan out your scripts, what kinds of tests you want to do, and what are the expectations for it. So work with your design team and try to find out what's changing from build to build, and see whether or not it makes sense. You know, you're going to have to do a lot of thinking here. This is not, you know, sitting and just, again, coding. Automation is so much more than just coding. And I think people get too caught up in the coding part. You know, it's fun, but there's so much more to automation. So, and then regression and functional testing. This is really where automation shines. Now, I explained a little bit of an example where it was not necessarily regression. It was more about checking a status on something. So I was checking the status of the CPU based on a bug I found. That's a little different than these type of going through it once, you know, going through the standard, okay, I'm going to run this test to say I'm starting the application from point A and I want to get to point Z. And I just want to run through it and run it a few times to make sure it doesn't crash. And make sure that the changes that were put in, that there seems to be nothing wrong with the actual application functionality. That's probably a good, you know, a good test. You're not going to run these things often in a release, or I should say, yeah, in a release. I take that back. In a build, you'll probably run this once, and then you're going to be finding that in a build, you're going to go ahead and run more, or you're going to spend more time on other types of tests, usually manual tests, that have to have the attention. But throughout builds, you'll probably want to go ahead and run regression tests. Again, your functional tests, you really want to think about, what is it you're trying to do? I described an example of, the CPU speed. It wasn't necessarily a functional test because I was checking something, but you may want to go ahead and create a functional test just to see, again, how often it breaks. Stress it out. Oh, I'm going to run through this 10 times in a minute, that kind of thing. Okay, so hopefully everyone is still with me.
1 second, there was a question from Sambit. And
okay.
Just to get it clear, he was wondering if you don't recommend to do automation at all.
I do not recommend no automation. I think it's important to combine. I tend to use a lot less automation than I would, say, in a client-server application testing or web application testing. There's, the problem with mobile is that the timelines in projects are so short, and automation takes a lot of planning and a lot of work beyond just writing the script. And see, that's the key. If you spend so much time in that, sometimes it's just simply faster to go ahead and to just do the test manually. But if you're given the time, try to automate what you can, because and to do it smart. That's the key. Try to really think about maintainability, speed. How quickly can you get it done in terms of writing the script, executing the script, reviewing the results, as opposed to just simply doing the manual test. Because in the manual test, you're writing your test by testing, and you're reviewing the results immediately. So what makes sense, again, in terms of your project timeline? And also, the other thing to consider is your company culture and your application itself. There's, what makes sense based on the domain. There are a lot of things to consider here when it comes to automation, whether it's mobile or not, but especially with mobile, because timelines are so critically short, and there's not as much understanding from the world, I guess, from upper management, from people who aren't as familiar. Remember, mobile testing is, I always say that they're not even in the teenager stage, they're in the infancy stage. Not infancy, I'm sorry, toddler stage. So we're not even to the point of, say, a 10-year-old. We're in, 2 to 5-year-olds. And not to say that mobile testing's only been around for 2 to 5 years, which is definitely not the case. It's just that we're still learning. We're still trying to get there. And there are so many more new tools out there and concepts and ideas and trainers that are really pushing forward, which is fabulous. And it is jumping, and it's going to jump very fast. I see it within the next 5 years. We're going to go from toddler stage to our early 20s, college age, in a very short period of time, because there's so many of us out there that are trying to get the word out and inspire people to come up with even better and more efficient ways of applying mobile testing. Hopefully that answers the question.
I think so. Thanks.
Okay. And so now we're going to go testing beyond the GUI. This is something that is very difficult to automate, but it's extraordinarily important to consider, and what you can automate, because there are sometimes you can automate certain things. One of the things that I had done was I was charging my device, but I wanted to see how it behaved over a period of time. And so I was able to set up an automation script that just kept the software running over a period of time while the device was charging. Then it would drain the device battery, and then it would start up again. And so it was interesting to see the results there. I had a lot of help with my automation scripts because I worked very closely with my hardware department. Now that's not something that most people have. They don't have a hardware department because they're not creating or manufacturing the hardware as well as the software. I was in a situation where it was, so I was very lucky. But there are situations where you have to, again, I go back to the word planning. You have to plan out what you want to do. A lot of times going ahead and just working with the device itself and coming up with your tests, and I have some specific tests later on, that you want to go ahead and just perform the tests yourself and not worry about automation. So there are things that you need to consider. Again, observe what is happening, and that's one of the key factors I want to point out. Be very, very aware of what you're testing and really think about what it is you want to test. Think about what your results are supposed to be, and also, again, observe what the results are. So, okay. And again, is it really necessary to have the test run automatically? Is it? Think about that. Do you really need to have it be automated? In the end, in mobile, I found 20% of my testing was automated, and the rest was manual. But that was for my situation. It doesn't always apply, although I highly doubt right now that anyone really is giving full test coverage and saying they're automating at 80% or 90%. I have a big doubt, just because of all the types of testing that has to be done. Okay, and then one size does not fit all. Please, 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 people, do not think that one tool is going to be the magic for everything. I get way too many questions on this. I was telling Jan earlier, I get 4 to 5 questions a day. Give me a tool. What's the best tool? There is no best tool. There is no one tool. There are many tools. I had at least 3 or 4 automation tools. They were homemade tools that I used to create my scripts or to have help creating my scripts. And not one commercial tool. So sometimes you may have to write your own tool to do the testing. That's what you want to think about. Again, it's planning out what you want to do, looking online to see if something is out there, and as far as open source tools, you're going to have to do your research, because mobile is in its infancy. Mobile tools are in their, I'm sorry, not infancy, I keep saying that, toddler stage. We're simply not there yet. We're getting there, but we're not there yet. So you may have to actually write the tool yourself. Okay, now we're going to talk about exploratory testing. And I am going to read this slide because James has written what I consider the best exploratory testing definition. And it's the plainest definition of exploratory testing is test design and test execution at the same time. This is the opposite of scripted testing, predefined test procedures, whether manual or automated. Exploratory tests, unlike scripted tests, are not defined in advance and carried out precisely according to plan. So one of the things that I end up doing in my exploratory testing is I'm going through and I will see something. I'll be like, oh, okay, I see this, I'm going through this, and this is my idea. Test design. My idea to test is to do, I'm going to charge my device and I'm going to watch the way the software behaves. That's it. That's my plan. Now I see something, oh, wait a minute, it's charging too fast. Well, okay, that's another test. I got to test that later. And I write it down as a reminder to myself, but I'm going to continue onward with that first test. That's, again, it's not ad hoc testing. You have an idea of what you're doing. It is a plan, but you're doing something and you're executing and designing your tests in your head as you go along, or you write it down, which you can. write down little bits and pieces to remind yourself, and then you can go ahead and document it accordingly. And I'll talk about that later. Okay, what is it that you need to be a good exploratory tester? You need awareness at a heightened level. You need to have discipline to constantly be aware. You need to use your discipline to be aware. And then you need discipline to maintain your focus. So here we've got two almost opposite ideas, focus and awareness. Awareness is on one side. If you're sitting there and you're doing your test and you're trying to be aware of everything going on around you, but at the same time you've got to focus on what it is you're doing. And that, I guess that could be the definition of multitasking in a way. You're doing a couple of different things at the same time, but you have to maintain your discipline to do it. So these skills, and these are skills, these are not anything else that they're real skills that you can describe what a good exploratory tester is and what they can do. I'm going to go ahead and, okay, let's start with this one. Keys to mobile testing. Sorry, I'm just thinking about timing. Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to talk about with mobile testing, the big key to it is looking beyond the GUI. Think beyond what is in front of you on the screen. Far too many people are so concerned about the functionality of what is in front of them that they're missing things like timing. In mobile in particular, timing is critical. It is something that people need to spend time thinking about. One example is when I was going ahead and I was testing my device, I went ahead and we happen to have, I don't know about the rest of the world, but in the United States, we have a time change, and it occurs in spring and it occurs in the fall. And it pushes, we recognize an hour difference in most of the country. And so what ends up happening is that your devices have to recognize that change. And sometimes the application doesn't do so. So you need to think about those things. How much does your application touch the clock? Remember, your clock is not part of the application. The clock is a part of the operating system. So you're looking beyond the GUI. You're looking beyond the application itself because there's an interdependency going on between the operating system and the application. That's a very important key to think about. Interdependencies are very, very important in mobile because it's, I think, more prevalent, at least I've seen it more prevalent than I have with standard desktop applications. In other ways, and that was just one example that applies to both. Domain knowledge. You really do need to have some domain knowledge. It really helps. Is it specific to mobile? Not necessarily, but it is very important to have. Knowledge of the system, and this is where I come into, again, the interdependencies. You really have to have a good understanding of how your hardware is expected to work with the firmware and with your software. So you have to spend some time talking to your developers in understanding the architecture, meaning understanding those calls to the firmware, to the hardware. So here's an example. You're on your, you're using Twitter on your phone, and all of a sudden you get an email notification on your phone, and it tells you have, pops up with whatever way of doing so. Now, some phones have an LED light to let you know that that there's an email notification or some kind of a notification. The point is that's touching hardware. The light itself is hardware. The light turning on is your firmware. And then the software gives the signal to the operating system to say, hey, you need to let the hardware know that there's a notification. So now you've got 3 levels to think about in your testing. And that is something that I can personally tell you, I have found a lot of bugs. It is because your software people don't talk to your hardware development team, and vice versa, and your operating system people don't talk to your software development team. So there's a lot of, I should say, direct contact. So there's a lot to consider. And I am going to tell you a brief story of a hard lesson I learned with regards to this. And it was devastating to me at the time. And when I was fairly early in my embedded software career, mobile software career, and that was, I went ahead and I found this, this error message on my configuration software. And this configuration software, it installed the software onto the mobile device. And what happened was that I was using it to install some software on my mobile device, and I saw this error message, exception error message, and I thought, oh, okay, so I'll report this error message to the configuration software, because that's where I saw the error. Well, after wasting that particular developer's time for 2 days of research, I was told, oh no, it's an operating systems problem, not configuration systems. So I should say software. So here I am going, oh my gosh, I just wasted 2 days of the wrong developer's time in research. Really spend the time to understand your architecture, how things talk to one another to avoid this problem. I was so upset with myself because I didn't take the time. I really did. I remember so clearly. I was so mad at myself. So please think how important it is for you to spend the time to really understand how things call from one place to another. Think about that notification. How is the notification being sent? Jan, do you have a question? Do you have a...
Yeah, there's a question from Pei Dong. He's wondering if you have another example on a bug caused by the timing aspect on the mobile device.
Oh, okay. Let's see. I have to think about this one. You know what? I'll tell you what, because I have to really think about it. Let me think about it, and I'll continue onward because I don't want to take too much of this time. If not, maybe we can address this at the end too. Thank you, though. It's a good question.
Okay.
Okay, so I also wanted to mention about the characteristics of bugs' behavior. They formulate patterns, and you may have to spend the time to continue. Oh, you know what? Here's I knew I'd come up with a timing one, and it comes down to patterns. A lot of times you end up having these nasty, and especially with mobile, because so much is going on. You have this nasty thing going on with communication, network communication. And this mobile device, what it would do is it would go and make a phone call. It had data, and it would go and make a phone call out to my communication server, which was a completely different company, so that it could then talk to the cellular company, so then it could then send data to our client server application. So it was a series of steps to get to where I needed to be. Well, the device itself, when it would try to make the phone call, it wasn't getting an answer from the communication server company. And so then my device would say, well, I'm gonna make the phone call again. I'm gonna ring it again. And what it came down to was it was a timing problem because it didn't wait long enough. The communication server was going ahead, and it was the software, their software was a certain amount of time, set up for a certain amount of time. The device software that we created, it was set for a shorter time. But it didn't always happen because, again, when you're making phone calls, sometimes rings are picked up or phones are picked up within 1 ring, some 3 rings, some 10 rings. It depends upon that communication that's wireless. Remember, you're talking wireless, so the wind can change things. You want to make sure that you are thinking about these things, these timing things when it's network communication, or I should say wireless communication. So in the sense of this particular story, and it's a good one. I'll give a very specific example where this was making the phone call, and then it wouldn't always show up. I'd see in my log files, like, okay, why did I get an exception? Why is it saying it's busy? The phone line's busy. Because my software saw, oh, the phone had already picked up and it had not hung up. So therefore, I'm going to report back in my software that it's busy. But the communication server itself was not busy. It was just the way the my software was working. It was not responding correctly. Well, yeah. And so it wasn't, because what happened was every time it did that, it threw an exception. When it threw an exception, every time you throw an exception, you get a memory loss, because that's now put into memory. And unless you reboot, you're not going to get that memory back. Most of the time with devices, especially something like this kind of a device, where it's on all the time, you end up with a problem with memory where then the system just locks up and you can't use it anymore. So it was critical that we resolve this problem, which, by the way, it was, in the sense where it was intermittent. This problem turned to be intermittent, and the pattern that I had to go through, it took me 4 days to find the right pattern and see what was really going on. And I spent so much time just trying to find this pattern. Now, I put a lot of time into this because it was a severe bug, in the sense that if something went wrong, it could really hurt a patient wearing the heart monitor. So you have to think about, is it worth your time to look for those patterns? In my case, I made the decision that it was, but it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes you want to work with a developer, but you want to spend the time to look for patterns and to see what is really happening with different types of conditions. Throw a little bit, oh, I think I'll try this to see if it happens. I'll try this to see if it happens. And that's where you really are getting into your exploratory type of testing. And use your life experiences for inspiration. Think about, well, okay, I'm a skater, and I use skating a lot with how I go about my testing. Actually, somebody just suggested to me to do a presentation on comparing the two, which I'm considering. But basically, it comes down to my discipline. How do I go about, with my testing? Do I put focus on this? Do I try different things? In skating, sometimes you get doing the same thing over and over and over again, and you can't seem to get out of it. I did this with my axle jump. I was just constantly going at the same type of pattern. And I had to stop. I had to pull myself away, look away, think about different things, try a different jump, try a spin, try footwork, try something else, and then come back to the jump. It's the same thing with testing, and I use that discipline I've learned in skating to apply to my testing. It sounds simple, but you know what? It isn't if you aren't thinking about it and you're just so focused on what you're doing. It's great to be focused, but be very careful and try and pull things in. You never know when you're going to be inspired. I get inspired every day. I get inspired by talking to people. I don't care how good you are at testing, how not good you are at testing, how many years. If you've never tested at all, I get inspired by everything because I want to learn. So be open to that. And it is really a good way to become even a better explorer. Okay. I'm going to go through this quickly, but I've talked about this, testing beyond the GUI. System integration testing is so important for mobile. Why? Because we have hardware, we have firmware, we have utilities in the firmware, your Bluetooth, your drivers. How many times do you need to consider those things when you're testing? Well, guess what? You don't think you do, but you do. Again, email notification. If you're, what happens to your device or what happens to your software? Does it allow you to receive email notifications? I've got some games that annoy me to no end because I can't see my notifications come up. It's like, why don't they include that? But then again, some people don't like it. So it's what is the proper, I should say, requirements that are from the customers, and what is the overall. So you'll have to think about those things. And of course your application software. So there's a lot to consider here. This is just a cool graph that I want you to think about all the different things that are included in mobile testing, because I spend more time system integration testing. Again, you cover it quickly as opposed to doing every little requirement. You put too much focus on the unit size and you miss the big picture. And when you miss the big, I never would have spotted that phone call calling twice if I didn't do the whole test, if I didn't see the whole picture. I would have missed it completely. So you want to consider more than just, again, what's in front of you on the screen. Okay, what is it we test? Well, there's, in mobile, there's a lot of different types of tests that we have to consider. There's developer tests. There's hardware conditions to think about. There's firmware tests. There's GUI functional tests. There's component integration tests. And if you don't know the difference between component integration and system integration, component just simply is one level above unit tests. These are primarily what developers do for testing, modular, module tests. And component is module to module, as opposed to a system, which is the entire application. So this is where you'll find a lot of different interesting bugs, is breaking down these types of tests and not just thinking about GUI functional testing. And I spoke about this earlier, about learning the architecture. Really spend the time with your developer, work with them. I sat down, well, okay, I'll give you a really good example of something. Oh, maybe I'll tell that later. No, this will be a good one. I had a real big problem. Our device, our mobile device, was shutting down, and our patients had to ship the mobile heart monitor back to us because it wouldn't work at all. You turned it off, you turned it back on, it was dead. I mean, the battery was fine, but the software just shut right down. Well, what ended up happening was, to make a long story short, the message count that sat in the device is, Jan, are you still hearing me? Because I'm getting a bit of a message here about network.
I'm hearing you. You're very clear on my side.
Oh, good. Okay, good. Okay, good. I want to make sure. I hope this continues to work. Okay, good. Oh, whoops. Okay. I don't know why this is up. Oh, I have to do this. Okay, just to get rid of that. So, okay. Sorry about that. So anyway, I went ahead and I just lost my train of thought. Oh, okay. So this message bin, we had this message bin in the device itself that only contained a certain amount of messages that was written within the software. And so what ended up happening was that message bin would fill up with messages. It would receive messages from another device, a sensor that actually collected heart data, that sent it to the monitor, and which is kind of like a phone, that did all the the work, the algorithm work, and then sent that data, which it had packaged the data into readable format for the doctor to look at. It sent it off, and so you had messages coming from two different directions. And what was occurring with some patients who were really having heart problems and creating all these messages, it filled up to the point where the device said, no more, that's it, I'm done, shutting down. And I had to sit with the developer and try to figure out what was really going on. We had no idea that it was the message bin at first. We couldn't figure out because I kept trying all these different tests, these stress tests, and all I kept getting was the device itself was shutting down. We ended up saving the company millions of dollars in shipping costs and new devices because you had to give a patient a brand new device. We ended up saving the company millions of dollars when we found this problem. So we sat down, we spent the time together, working together to figure out this problem. Talk to your developer, work with them, learn the code a little bit. You don't have to learn code. You don't have to read code to the point of a programmer, but you do need to understand how to read it to the point of you understand kind of what's going on. What do you expect to see the behavior to do? And having a developer to work with is really important. Okay, so let's see here. There we go. I'm not going to read this slide because it takes far too much effort. This was written by John Hagar, who we both co-presented at STPCon back in April. But this is a fabulous slide in terms of where bugs lurk, and in particular with mobile. And so one of excuse me, the considerations that you want to think about are between software and hardware development life cycles. How about firmware upgrades? You know, you tested your build of your application on one operating system upgrade, but then you have another upgrade coming up. And so do you or do you not consider testing with that before you release? Is it important? Those kinds of things, this is where bugs can be found. So there's a lot of, there's an awful lot that has to be covered here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move forward, but take the time to read this later on in the presentation. A lot of times, too, timing is a big thing. I will say this, real-time performance testing has to be done in terms of, again, interdependencies, calls from one system to the other, or one application or one environment to the other. So be very careful about that kind of timing. Again, go back to my example with the phone call. You know, here you got one system, one software, communication software that had the timing set at a certain rate, and my software had another. Yet both were releasable products on their own, but to talk to one another, that timing had to be just right, and it wasn't set properly. So you really need to think about your performance too. Okay, we really can't tell sometimes when what tests should be run in advance. So we went ahead and one of the things that I like to do is I like to come up with ideas on what happens when. Excuse me. This is a great slide in terms of test ideas. What happens when your battery runs low? Think about that question. What kinds of things can happen with your software when the battery runs low? What about when there's a date and time change? Have you ever tested to make sure that next year's dates actually work within your application? What about searches? Does your device have the capability of doing searches of an online database? I'm sorry, not online, onboard database. So does your application have its own database? And obviously it would not be a relational database, but some sort of a database. One thing you might want to think about too is what happens to your application when your device memory is full, the storage is full. What happens? How does the device recover? How does the application recover? You know, with the message bin being full, it never recovered. There was no contingency plan there. So you want to think about these things when you're testing. Again, this is a great point when it comes to exploratory testing. And here's some tests, and this is what I was talking about earlier about you know, specific exploratory testing. And what I did was with a battery test that I found. Well, I'll start at the beginning. I went ahead and I noticed one day that my device was acting funny. All of a sudden, I wasn't getting the data being sent in a timely manner while I was charging my device. And when that happened, what I did was I says, I better go and do some more testing on this. So I started creating a spreadsheet. And the spreadsheet was battery levels, and making sure that I went ahead and I had the application installed and in use. But then ideas started popping into my head, and I started thinking about Well, I got to check to see what kind of memory is in use, because I noticed memory usage was different at different levels of charging. And then, so what ended up being what I thought was a very simple spreadsheet turned out to be this mega spreadsheet, or several spreadsheets recording all this information. But it was easy enough to do. And so I was going ahead and I was recording all this stuff, but I was writing sticky notes on my desk. Oh, make sure you test the timing of the download of the installation while I was going ahead and installing and charging at the same time. Well, I better check to see if the timing of the download while charging, that's important to figure out. And what about completion? How does it complete in a certain time? So there's a lot of things here that you can consider, but you have to write stuff down, so because you're never going to remember them. This is where awareness, discipline, and focus come to mind here, which is why I showed you this spreadsheet. There's so many different tests on this one spreadsheet. It looks simple, but yet I could probably come up with about 50 or 60 tests just on this one spreadsheet. And I went beyond 50%. I just ran out of room on the slide. I went all the way up to 100% in increments to try and see. I did see some very interesting behavior with charging a device, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But I wanted you to think about, when you're doing exploratory testing for mobile, one of the best things you can do, especially with battery and timing and temperature and installation and the use of the application, is create that spreadsheet and do go ahead and break down all these different factors, because this testing is very important. And you will see some interesting behavior. I can promise you that. Okay. Now, this is another slide that John Hagar wrote for our STPCon presentation. There are some very important bits of information here that, again, you'll have to read at a later date. But one of the things that I did want to point out is to understand what your input is going to be in your test and what is your output based on connections to the software. So again, earlier I talked about interdependencies. It's not just the software. It's software to firmware to hardware and back through again. Or maybe it's just software application to firmware and then back again. And then maybe go to hardware and back again. So there's a lot of considerations that you want to think about. And it's more than just thinking about, oh, I'm just going to do my functional testing. There's signal interfaces here that you want to go ahead and take time to consider. Also, consider your risks. Please be sure to consider your risks. Do I test this or not? And then why? Okay, so I'm going to go beyond this because again, there's a lot of information that really is important. Okay, so now what I wanted to think about or talk about was hardware signals, different types of hardware signals. You can go ahead and get some real fun devices. Is it MathLab? Yeah, MathLab that can provide this kind of a picture. So you can go ahead and check out signals of network communication, as well as a lot of other interesting things, timing signals, and it's software and hardware. Well, hardware too, but it's software that you have to learn how to read and analyze. But it's very helpful to go ahead and learn this information or work with someone that is used to using these. I had the benefit of a hardware department that I worked with my electrical engineers directly. I used to sit and watch them use these, and we'd analyze together. And it gave me a lot of really good information. So there's another important point about signals is network cellular strength, signal strength. One of the things that people don't always think about is that the strength of the signal can affect the way the software will behave in terms of from one place to another. Remember, with mobile, you're moving, and when you're in the car and in the desert, you are not going to get as great of a signal as you would, say, for example, on a country road between, Washington, D.C. and New York City. You're going to have a little bit better or I should say on the highway, not on a country road, but on the highway, you'll probably get a better signal than you would, say, in the desert. So it's something that you want to think about when you're testing, is to consider that network signal. What are the boundaries? And maybe somebody knows those boundaries, but with mobile, we don't always flush out a lot of those kinds of bits of information. A lot of the benchmarks simply haven't been done because, again, it's a fairly new industry. We don't think about those things, so therefore the requirements are not written. You have to go ahead and provide that information, and then people decide whether or not that's good enough. So you do want to think about those tests. Very important. Okay, now I can talk about my fun temperature problem that I discovered. When I was testing my charging of the battery, I ended up having a big problem with how hot the device got. Now keep in mind, it's a heart monitor that usually older people wear. When I say older, we're talking 60s, 70s. That skin is sensitive. And when the device itself, which is, again, you're keeping a battery contained, right? So it's a small handheld device. When the heat is built up, it gets hot because it's all contained. There's not enough release. And again, we as mobile testers, we don't always think about those things. We think about what's on the screen. Oh, did the OK button work? Did I make the phone call? But yet you've got to stop and think about temperature. And one of the key factors I found was that my device was heating up to 60 degrees Celsius. That's about 135 degrees in Fahrenheit, in case anybody doesn't know the change or the conversion. So it's pretty hot. And if you want to put something like that against your skin, now somebody who's sensitive, that makes it even worse. So we changed the software to recognize whether or not it was going to be too hot. Now also, another important point about the heat is that because it's a small device, your battery sits very close to the cell modem. And if it heats up too much, guess what happens? You fry the cell modem. Now you got no communication. Now what? With a heart monitor, that's devastating. So you really need to think about, oh, what about airplanes? What would happen if something got too hot in an airplane? That would be really devastating. So think about those things. Again, it's a small device. It's contained. And one specific example is an iPhone has the iPhone 4 rather has a specific problem with charging the device, using the GPS, and talking on the phone all at the same time. Guess what happened? Everything shut down. It got too hot. At least the iPhone, as you see in the slide here, the iPhone shows that the temperature error appears, and now the device can't be used, but it also can't be shut down either. It's also not charging. Everything is shut down, everything. So it has to cool down before it can start again. The software controls whether or not it can read the temperature, yes, and then it can turn back on again. So you want to be able to have the ability to read the temperature. That's the test you have to think about. That's where you want to say, okay, if it gets to this, and you have to have a device to attach to read the temperature. Now they're easily available. They're less than $30, so any department head will spend the money to do these kinds of tests. It's important to do these tests if your device, if your application is going to be something that is used in conjunction with something else, as well as charging. But you should try and do these tests to think about them, even just once or twice. It doesn't have to be something that's constantly tested, but you want to think about these tests to do within the lifespan of the application, just to see how it behaves. Okay, let's see. Oh yes, error recovery. How does it recover? one of the things that I talked about earlier was that error, or the exception error that occurred with the phone was making the phone call, and then I get another phone call, it would start up again, and then it would shoot me this exception error. And of course you got the, the problem of memory being taken up. But my developer said to me, well, it recovers because all it does is hangs up the phone, waits 10 minutes, and then it'll try again, and then everybody's happy. But the problem in the sense is, yes, it did recover, and that's a good thing. You want it to do that. But you also have to think about the other end of things of what happens when you go ahead and you, you lose that memory. So is the phone going to be shut off? Probably not. So does it reboot itself? Probably not, unless it gets to a point where it does. Now, most phones will reboot themselves. Sometimes, though, I've seen where applications won't send that signal. So, again, test for these things. Think about them. Think about the error recovery. And stress out that software. Make sure you do that. Okay, specialized. These attacks are something that you want to think about again. These are very specific to mobile. The network communication protocol. Think about how messages go, how they're packaged, and how they travel through the system. It's with mobile, it's an interesting protocol. Some of the communication protocols are very specific to the software application itself, but then they have to. So in our case, we had a specific protocol that talked to our communication software. Then from there, it was another protocol that talked to our client-server application. This may not be the case with, well, it isn't the case with phones, because phones and the network wireless communication is pretty much the same. It's cellular. But if you're working with embedded devices or proprietary devices, you may end up having to think about protocol testing. So you'll have to learn what that protocol is. You'll have to see the documentation. Whoever wrote up the software for those protocols, you have to learn how that protocol works. What is contained in those messages? And what is expected to be contained in those messages? Time-based, again, a lot of timing is involved, and security and fraud. Now, I have not talked about security at all. I don't know a lot about security testing for mobile. I don't think many people do yet, but there are some really good pioneers out there that are working hard. You'll have to contact me in terms of names because I can't think of anything right off the top of my head right now. But there are some really good, there's some good work out there with security. It's still, it's not even in toddler stage. That is in infancy because it's becoming a real big, really big problem. People are concerned about phones being hacked and tablets being hacked. So anyway, so that's something that is brand new and way beyond my scope, that's for sure. Okay, common tools. Now I use, if you notice the image here, tools are not automation software. This is the kind of thing I use when I do my testing, especially exploratory testing. You're not using automation for exploratory. You're using pen and paper. I love my spreadsheets and I love my sticky notes. And I sit there and I use my, another tool I use is my log files. I sit and I read my log files over and over again. And I see, okay, I know I did this. I pressed this button to see the result here. And what that does is that goes ahead and it shows what is happening when you're doing something. With the interdependencies, right, between the software and the firmware and the hardware, I see what's going on based on what the log file is saying. Oh, I see where this call is coming from. Okay, now I see where it's going. That's how I found the problem with that pattern about the double phone call. I looked at that log file and I was watching, and how I found the pattern was I sat there and I manually did tasks with my hands, right? Manually sat there and did things and while I was doing it, I'm watching my log and seeing, okay, this was happening when I did this. This is happening when I did this. And all of that showed me was sequentially what was happening, and I could now finally pinpoint the pattern. So you will use that as a tool. There is an open source tool that I used called TerraTerm. It's a serial to USB communication. So you have to have a serial to USB converter to be able to use it. Well, you can use your serial port from your desktop. It does that tool. The log will appear on your desktop, but it communicates to the USB port on your device. And so what ends up happening is that you'll see what's going on. And I do recommend TerraTerm because I know it well, but there are many, many log files out there that you can use to be able to see what's going on. And you can manipulate them, you know, how fast you want to see it. You can, I found it very helpful to use as a way to give information to my developer to say, hey, please go ahead, and this is what I saw when this was happening. This is, and I could pinpoint each line and say, I did this, and this is what happened. I did this, and this is what happened. So when a developer says, oh, I can't reproduce, here you go. You know, this is what it's a really good tool to use to help them determine what's really going on. I had an operating system log file as well as an application log file. Very, very helpful. Ask your developers to create log files in terms of what's happening, because it's really important to help you and help them. And I should say to help the company you work for to really figure out what's going on. And also for future, you know, not all developers stay in one place, right? Not all testers do. So it's a way for learning, people to learn.
JeanAnn,
okay.
We got a question from Sambits. How do I generate log files in Android Jelly Bean?
I'm sorry, you broke up. Can you repeat that, please?
Oh, how do I create log files in Android Jelly Bean?
I couldn't tell you. I have no idea because I don't know anything about the Android Jelly Bean. I haven't had a chance to work with it. I do know there is, is it Logicat? Logicat. There is, Android does have a couple of log file tools that you can use. Unfortunately, I would go to the App Store. I don't know off the top of my head.
If we'll remember it, we'll send it via email to Sambit.
Yeah, and I'll definitely do. I'll be happy to do the research on it and see, you know, with people that I work with. I'll be happy to get back to you on it.
Okay.
But yeah. Sorry about that. I can't answer that off the top of my head. Good question. Okay. So one of the things that I want you to do is to make sure that you use tables to document your situation. And don't think you can get away with not documenting your exploratory testing, because how are you going to know what to do the next time? Not only that, if you're not there, how is anybody else going to capitalize on your hard work? And the other thing, too, is that it gives you a chance to say, hey, see the kinds of tests I did at review time, which we all want, you know, kudos and raises. So show what you did. So you want to document, and usually I'm preaching to the choir with testers. They know to document. But the thing is that it's really hard to be disciplined about documenting your exploratory testing. And the way that I did it, and I'm going to go back to my, this right here. Oops. Okay, there we go. When I go ahead and I used this type of a table, and I started writing out all these things, I was able to come up with a very easy way to report my results. And still, somebody could read this and go, oh, I see what tests you did cover. So make sure that it's something small, just quick words, with simple words, few words, not a major sentence with 10 steps on how to reproduce it. You don't need to do that. When you write a bug, that's when you need to be careful. But in your tests, you do not. Even, this is also true, and I don't know how many of you listening in, this is also true for regulated, because all they care about is the fact that you covered things and you're showing you did tests. That's what they care about. It's not, they don't need a novel for each test. Okay? So let's see here. Okay, let's go back. And then one of the things that I did want to mention too is don't be afraid to use sticky notes. Don't be afraid to use, you know, I've also written the log of, I have a notebook. This is how I do it. I have sticky notes on my desk. I have a little notebook that I can write my log of what I'm doing. And then I'm also going back and forth to my my spreadsheets. So I've got these things going on, and I sit there and I'm constantly jumping from one to another, but I'm being focused enough to make sure I get what I want documented. Because again, and still stick to the test and still come up with ideas all at the same time and be aware of what's going on. So I'm going to tap in again, your skills. Awareness, discipline, and focus is very critical, because with mobile, there's always something to hit you and go, oh, I need to do that. Oh, I need to do that. Oh, and if you don't maintain your focus, it's so easy to get lost. And I am guilty of it so quickly. I get so distracted with other things that this is the system I figured out what works for me, is that I have my log, I start writing it down. I have my sticky notes. Oh, that's an idea. I got to put that aside for a moment, but it's a sticky note. I got to a point where I had, you know, I started putting sticky notes into my log so that I had an idea of, okay, oh, I remember doing this, and that became my log. And then I started writing my things down in my summarization ended up being in my table. In the end, I got all the information in a short period of time, and I got a lot of testing done. So now, summarization of techniques. So one of the things that that I find really helpful in mobile testing in particular, again, keep in mind you have the network communication you got to deal with, because even if you don't, your application is not talking out to a website or to another server. It's just the application itself. You still have to download the application. So there is network communication there, or cellular communication. There's also, you know, your operating system communication. How often are you communicating with it? And then there's still another layer of hardware, the battery, the temperature, you know, LED lights, those kinds of things. So you've got all these things going on all at once. Combine your tests. Go ahead and just think about how you can combine your test. You can do a functional test and a stress test and even a performance, all on the same test, and record it as such. So now you're not wasting time doing, okay, well, I got to do all my functional tests at this point and get all those, and I can check that off, and my boss will be happy. And now I'm going to spend the time doing the stress test. Oh, but, you know, I did kind of start it over here, but now I got to specifically do it here. What ends up happening is you start wasting time. In mobile, we can't afford to do that. Combine your tests. But again, we got to go back to planning. Think about your planning. Think about how you want to do these tests and how you can combine them. Very, very important, but very powerful tool. And also makes project managers and bosses very, very happy. Even developers. It really does. They like it. And it also shows developers too, huh? She really knows her stuff, or he really knows his stuff. That's pretty cool. You know, trust me, I've gotten it. It's kind of a nice validation from a developer. Okay, so you know, and again, for automation, your combination tests are very helpful for automation, or I should say, automation is helpful for combination tests. But you have to sometimes be there to witness it, and that makes it difficult to apply automation. Again, what do you expect to get out of your automation tests? You really want to think about that. I recommend automating positive end-to-end testing for regression between builds. That's something that just go ahead and do that. Get that done. I think it's important that automation is applied at some point. You want to get those mundane tasks out of the way, but they have to be done. It's not, you know, it's not like you can skip them. So just get them done, and then go ahead and focus in on all this other stuff that I've talked about. And then using your tools, go ahead and get tools for memory. Check out your memory. You know, one of the tools that I've seen that's really kind of cool, and I have not used personally, is it goes ahead and it recognizes and records your memory usage and battery voltage, and I'm trying to get them to record the temperature, is Solstice Touch Test. Very interesting tool. You can download a free copy and take a look at it, but it may or may not be the end-all and be-all of tools for you. Keep in mind, you know what you need. The company that sells the tool does not. So don't go around asking for what's the best tool, because there isn't one. There's only one. And how do you know it's the best? I mean, if I say to you, oh, this is the best tool, how do you know? Unless you test it, right? You're testers. So how do you know? Don't use the word best. That's just a silly terminology. Okay, and then there's documenting. Go ahead and use video. Have you ever thought about using video when you're doing your tests? That actually is documentation, and that can be recognized by anybody as documenting your test. So go ahead and use that. You know, use story formats. I explained to you some of my stories that I've had. I've gone ahead and actually have done that and recorded it and said, go ahead, here's my story, here's my test, it's done. And definitely use, consider your test user action. And I know I didn't talk much at all about user experience tests, but, and again, please check out Dr. Philip Liu's presentation. He really covered, impressed me so much. There is so much information about user experience tests that we need to think about with mobile. It is the most important factor with mobile testing. And I did not talk about that because, honestly, I couldn't do it any better than Dr. Liu. So make sure, and that's L-E-W, by the way, in case anybody doesn't know.
I'll put it in afterwards. I'll send it to everyone.
Oh, good. Okay, wonderful, because it really is a fabulous presentation. And I sat there and I was listening to him. I was so entranced by what he covered. And so anyway, you want to go ahead and you want to think about your user actions and make sure you record them and talk to people who use the application. Talk to people who use a application. I found some interesting things last night at a meeting I went to for the Greater Boston Software Testers. And I was talking to them, this one person, about how he used his phone application. He was using a particular application. I said, well, why did you do this and not this? And he said to me, he goes, well, because I didn't know I could. And I showed him some things about it, and it was a weird application. And I said, well, why don't you try this instead? And he goes, I never thought to do that. But I did this instead. And I looked at it and went, I didn't know you could do that. So you want to talk to people, and you want to learn how they think, because you never know. And this is true of any software tester, right? We all have ideas about how we would do something, but put yourself in someone else's shoes. Ask somebody who's never tested before. Ask somebody who just uses the application in general, or uses a different one. But very, very important for mobile. Okay, and I'm concluding. I don't know how we are in time, Jan, but
we're a bit over time.
Oh, geez, okay. All right, I'm going to do real quick then. I didn't know. I'm sorry. Okay, mobile embedded, just poking around at the GUI will leave bugs hiding. Yeah, you really can't, and that was actually written by John Hagar. You really can't just poke at something. You've got to go ahead and you've got to think about the different types of testing. John uses the word attacks. You want to attack that software and plan it. So, you know, go ahead and consider what it is that you want to do. You know, context matters. It really does matter what it is you want to test, what you need to test, because there is no one set of perfect tests, especially in mobile, but anywhere. You know, there is no such thing as best practices. Again, who decided it was best? And it was best for everything? Did you test everything? Think about that. again, it applies for tools. Did everybody test it? And testing is hard. It really is hard, and it takes a lot of skill and effort. So make sure you understand and really hone those skills: awareness, discipline, and focus. And I am done. This is my contact information, and
thank you very much, JeanAnn. I think we don't have enough time for questions. We still have some questions open from the audience. I'll send them to you via email and then respond them to the other people via email as well. Thank you very much for the webinar. It was very interesting, and I'm looking forward to hear more from you. And you're speaking soon somewhere, or?
Yes, I am. I am going to be doing a full-day tutorial with John Hagar, the author of the book that I mentioned earlier, and it's going to be at CAST. If you look online for CAST, Association for Software Testing Conference. So if you go ahead and search online for Association for Software Testing Conference, you'll find us. And you can sign up. There's still plenty of time to sign up. And I hope to see many of you or meet many of you at any of the conferences that I attend. And please don't hesitate to come up to me. Please don't hesitate to talk to me. I love meeting people, and I'm not very good at chatting online, just as an FYI. I'll chat on Twitter, but I don't do a lot of Skyping. And the other thing to think about is weekend testing. I am going to be facilitating another session on weekend testing coming up in July. So feel free to look at weekendtesting.com.
I'll share all the information with them. I think that's
excellent.
Via email. Again, JeanAnn, thank you very much. Thanks everyone for joining, and I hope to see you guys again. Have a great day. Till soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.